Hi everybody, this is Matthew Poes with Poes Acoustics, and in this video I'm going to cover another soundproofing topic since that's one of my more favorite topics, and this is going to be about specialty drywall like Quietrock and whether that's something you should be spending your money on, we'll say. And actually I'm going to add into that mass-loaded vinyl and other specialty soundproofing materials versus other approaches. So many of you know that when you're specifying materials for a sound isolated or soundproof, as is often said, room, that there's a lot of specialty materials that get used in the high-end installs, and they're very expensive. And so you may think like, well, there's no other way, I have to do it. The other thing that's happened though is that there's been a sort of disproving that that's the only way, and a recognition that there are other materials you can use that are cheaper that can achieve similar results, and therefore those materials are a waste of money. Those extreme views are neither of those are correct, basically. So let's just start with kind of how this works. As I've covered in other videos on sound isolation, you've got the decoupling, which is an important way of keeping sound from radiating in or out of a room. You've got mass. That's a really critical part of keeping sound from radiating in and out of the room. And you've got damping. There are a variety of areas where dampening plays a role, but there are two key ones. There's a resonant zone in the low frequencies that helps to keep low frequencies in or out of the room, and there's a high frequency coincidence zone. It's related to the materials. So you need to get all of those things right. Mass-loaded vinyl has high mass and good damping. So it's a really good material for blocking sound that doesn't then have these resonance zones. They're basically damped out, they don't exist. Drywall, on the other hand, has both. It's not that well damped. However, it's still much better damped than plywood. And so the problem you've got is all these materials have different resonances, unless again it's mass-loaded vinyl, and you got to deal with them somehow. So one of the things you can do, people know the product green glue, you can add a viscoelastic adhesive between two layers of drywall. It creates constrained layer dampening where the one layer constrains the other, and they can essentially slip instead of vibrating like this. They slip, and that tends to shear away a lot of the energy that's transmitting in. It's fairly effective, and it's a lot cheaper to get two layers of drywall and glue them together with green glue and then screw those into the wall. It actually doesn't work that way. You screw one in, you put the green glue on, the next piece you put that on, you screw that in. But in any case, you get the idea. That's a lot cheaper than mass-loaded vinyl or these specialty drywalls. But here's the problem. You start to get very, very thick, and you start to lose a lot of floor space, and it becomes unreasonable, potentially completely untenable. Mass-loaded vinyl is half the thickness of drywall for the same mass or less. And so mass-loaded vinyl, you can do two layers of that, and you'll double your mass relative to what you would have done with drywall. Mass is mass, you know, it doesn't really matter if it's drywall or mass-loaded vinyl or concrete or whatever. So the more mass you can get in a given thickness, the more efficient you can make that wall in terms of its ability to stop sound for a given total thickness. The air gap matters, nothing you can do about that. You can't make that smaller, so that's helpful. And to keep from losing more floor space than is necessary, because you get to a point, because you have to double the mass of the whole wall. That means both sides plus some of the actual structure itself to get an extra 6 points. And so it gets to a point where like you've got two layers on one side, two layers on the other. Well, now instead to increase it, you got to add, so you got 4, you got to go to 8 layers to get another 6 points. To go and get another 6 points, you got to go from 8 to 16 layers because you got to double it. That's a little crazy. It starts to get really, really thick. And so adding mass-loaded vinyl helps you to keep the thickness a lot lower. That's also where something like Quietrock comes in. So they've got this the Quietrock 540 or 545, something like that. It's 1 3/4 inches. It's got many layers of basically damping compounds, like a mass-loaded vinyl-like material, different thicknesses of drywall. All of this helps to control resonances. The coincidence frequency is damped out on it. It helps to really damp the low frequencies, and it's 1 3/4 inches. It actually outperforms 1 3/4 inches worth of drywall with green glue. And so the advantage of it is that for a given thickness, it's almost 7 pounds per square foot of mass, it performs very well. It's insanely expensive. It's like 220 pounds a sheet. It's really hard to work with. Like there's lots of reasons not to use it, but if what you need is the best possible performance in a given thickness, it's actually a very good material. So cost no object, worth using. Lead is a great material, it just happens to be deadly. But for sound isolation, it's extremely dense. Depleted uranium would probably be even better, but obviously we're not sticking that in our walls. So it's really about trying to come up with the best combination of materials that makes sense for a given thickness. And I've talked against mass-loaded vinyl before, and I've talked against using specialty drywalls because for the money, it's a very poor value, and you can do similar or better performance using standard drywall and green glue and good air gaps and good decoupling. But what you'll find is you're going to run into certain situations where you have to be very conscious of thickness, where you don't have the ability to do these very, very thick walls. Adding the layers are a problem. You need more isolation, and so these specialty materials really are the best option. And I would not shy away from using them. So I hope you found this helpful. As I said, this is just a quick video on sound isolation and materials that I think are useful for that, and that some of these specialty materials, while expensive and not a great value, are very efficient, they're very effective for a given thickness, and should definitely be considered. Subscribe to my channel, you can get more of these videos, and I appreciate you watching and supporting me. So thank you again, and there's more coming.